All right, everybody. The last two chapters are going to be on Stephen and on Lewis, the worker who works outside. Okay, so I hope you enjoy these last two chapters. This book has been so funny. So Stephen had green hair. He had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green leotards. I'm sorry, leotard. The leotards matched his hair. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jewell's Halloween party. But unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. Haha, you look so different, said Jason. Jason was Stephen's best friend. So do you, said Stephen. Halloween is on Sunday. Today is only Friday, said Stephen. Haha, you'll probably come to school on Sunday, Mrs. Jewell said we'd have the party today. But none of the other children wore costume, only Stephen. All right, class, said Mrs. Jewell. It's time for our Halloween party. See, said Stephen. Mrs. Jewell gave each child a cookie that looked like an orange witch with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stephen and forgot to give him one. Stephen didn't ask for it. He was afraid that she'd laugh again. The children finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. All right, class, said Mrs. Jewell. The party is over. We have a lot of work to do. Stephen felt like a fool. The party lasted less than 3 minutes, and he had to spend the rest of the day wearing his goblin suit. Look, Stephen's wearing his sister's leotards, laughed Dana. They're green, just like his hair, said Fatso. Everybody laughed. Mrs. Jewell began the math lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 5. That's wrong, Joy shouted. Mrs. Jewell tried again. 2 plus 2 equals 3. That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 again and got 43. It was useless. No matter how she tried, she could not get 2 plus 2 to equal 4. I don't understand it, she said. They've always equaled 4 before. Suddenly she screamed. The chalk turned into a squiggly worm. She dropped it on her foot. Then all the lights went out and the blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long tongue and pointed ears. She stepped off the screen and into the classroom. It was the ghost of Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the blackboard. Trick or treat, you rotten kids, she said. Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where's Todd? Sorry. Who is that? Asked Mrs. Jewell. Mrs. Gorf, said Damon. Who's Mrs. Gorf? Asked Mrs. Jewell. She was the meanest teacher we ever had, said Rondy. Well, what happened to her? Asked Mrs. Jewell. Louis ate her, said Jason. Well, I'm not going to allow this. Get out of my classroom, she said. It's Halloween, sweet teacher, said Mrs. Gorf. Ghosts can go anywhere they like. I've come for a little class reunion. But it isn't Halloween, said Mrs. Jewell. Halloween is still in 2 days away. I know, said Mrs. Gorf, but Halloween falls on a Sunday this year, so we are celebrating it on the Friday before. Stephen leaped up from his seat. See, I was right, he said. Today is the day we were going to celebrate it. The day Friday before. Mrs. Gorf proved it. He ran up to Mrs. Gorf. They all laughed at me and made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up, but they were the ones who were wrong. You and I were right. He put his arms around Mrs. Gorf and hugged her. Mrs. Gorf gasped, and then she disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jewell picked up the piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's good, she said. When 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen. All the children who had laughed at Stephen now called him a hero, but they told him to change out of his costume. So at lunch, Stephen went home, washed up, and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt. Of course, his hair was still green. It always was. Chapter 30. Lewis. Lewis had a red face and a mustache of many colors. He was the yard teacher at Wayside School, and it was his job to see that the children didn't have too much fun during lunch and recess. And if he hadn't already guessed, he was the one who wrote the book. On June 10th, there was a blizzard, and Lewis was afraid that the children would have too much fun, so nobody was out loud outside. Class said, Mrs. Jewell, after you finish your lunch today, come back up to the classroom. You are not allowed outside. The children all went to the lunchroom, and Miss Mush had made a tuna surprise, and they all looked at it and then hurried back upstairs. I don't think they liked tuna. There was nothing to do. Now, class, said Mrs. Jules, I know that you are all bored, but I have a special surprise for you. I hope it's better than the tuna surprise. Mrs. Jules continued, Louis is going to come upstairs and entertain us. He will tell us a story. Now I want you all to be on your best behavior. When Louis walked in, all the children booed. Are you going to tell us a story? Asked Bibi. Yes, said Louis. Well, it better be good, Bibi warned. It better be better than tuna surprise, said Butterfingers. I thought the tuna surprise was good, said Louis. You'd eat dirt if they put enough ketchup on it, said Mac. Hey, everybody be quiet, said Todd. Let him tell the story. Not too loud, Louis, said Sherry. I'm trying to get some sleep. Louis sat in the middle of the room and all the children gathered around. Louis began his story. This is a story about a school very much like this one. But before we get started, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. In this story, every classroom is on the same story. Which one, the 18th? No, said Louis. They're all on the ground. The school is only one story high. Not much of a school, laughed Damon. Louis continued. Now you might think that the children there are strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I tell them stories about you, they thought that you were strange and silly. Us? Said the children. How are we strange? I'm normal, said Stephen. Aren't I? As normal as I am, Joe said. The children at the school must be crazy, said Lizzie. Really? Tell us about them, Louis, Bibi demanded. For one thing, Louis said, none of these children has ever been turned into an apple. That's so silly, said Bibi. Everybody's been turned into an apple. It's part of growing up. Louis continued. Dead rats don't walk into classrooms wearing raincoats. Well, what do they wear? Tuxedos? asked Todd. And girls never try to sell their toes. Well, no wonder, said Leslie, at today's prices. Louis continued. They don't trade names, and they don't turn into mosquito bites into numbers, and they don't count the hairs on their head, and the walls don't laugh, and 2 + 2 always equals 4. How horrible, said Damon. That's not the worst of it, said Louis. They had never tasted Mauricia-flavored ice cream. A hush fell over the classroom, and Mrs. Jules... A hush fell over the classroom. Mrs. Jules, I'm so scared, said Allison. Is there really a school like that? Of course not, said Mrs. Jules. Louis was just telling a story. It was a good story, said Leslie. I thought it was stupid, said Kathy. I liked it, said Rodney. It was funny. Mrs. Jules said, Louis, it was a very entertaining story, but we don't really go in for fairy tales here. I'm trying to teach my class the truth. That's all right, said Louis. I have to go down to room 29 now and tell them a story. He started out the door. Class, said Mrs. Jules, let's all thank Louis for his wonderful story. Everybody booed. All right, so that's the end of the story. So Louis was trying to tell the class a story about a school that didn't have a lot of floors, and it was all on just one floor, and they didn't do all these weird things. And did the kids like it? No, not really. So now this is about the author, the person who wrote the story. Louis Sachar was the author. Él escribió este libro. So when Louis Sachar was going to school, his teachers always pronounced his wrong name. Now that he has become a popular author of children's books, teachers all over the country are pronouncing his name wrong. It should be pronounced Sacker, like someone who tackles quarterbacks or stuffs potatoes into sacks. Mr. Sachar, who is a lawyer, now writes for children full time. He lives in Austin, Texas, with his wife and their daughter. All right, that's good to know. All right, everybody, this was such a fun story to read. Every child is so different. They experience life in different ways. And it was just a fun story to laugh to. All right.